how should I put it? It was pedal to the metal there every day. Not necessarily for us, but for the agents. Um, but that's and then eventually I think they did solve it, but they were all acquitted in court.
Did you hear how they broke into it though?
Yeah,
What was there? Yeah. Well, how'd that go down?
they were on the office was right across from the courthouse immediate, and there was a door from the hallway that was kind of like an access door where employees went in and out. And
Welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you?
Great, Ray. How are you?
Outstanding. Today we have a guest. He's a former FBI agent, known for his extensive work in investigating violent crime and drugs, specifically outlaw motorcycle gangs. Greg Auld. Greg, welcome to the show.
thank you very much.
Great to have you here, Greg. And I've known Greg, just so everybody knows, I've known Greg for more than 30 years. I mean, it might be closer to 40, going on 40 years, Greg. It's been a long, long time. In the early 90s, we first met.
Yep, when you came to Philly.
Yep. We'd like to kind of start out like we do with all our guests, Greg, is tell us a little bit about you. Like where are you from? Where'd you grow up? What was your upbringing like? And how'd you come about joining the FBI?
Well, I was born in Delaware County in the southeast corner, Upper Darby. Specifically in Upper Darby, it was a little section of Upper Darby called Stonehurst Hills.
That's Pennsylvania, by the way, for our
Pennsylvania, correct.
international listeners.
Okay, Pennsylvania, USA, and
North America.
North America. We were. It was like a very tight knit Irish Catholic neighborhood with all hardworking blue collar type people, and we weren't rich. We were 5 children, 2 adults, my parents, and 5 children and a dog, and it was a 2-bedroom house. So there was a lot of close quarters, so to speak. But everybody in the neighborhood supported each other and took care of each other. It was just, I thought, a great place to grow up.
That reminds us, Ray, of our guest from 2 weeks ago, Charlie Jardines, growing up in Queens with 2 bedrooms and about 8 kids in that house. So yeah, that's Irish Catholic, Italian Catholic, or that's how families were back in the day. Not too much so anymore, but I think it makes for a great upbringing.
I grew up in a row home.
So did I.
Same here.
It was a row home. We were upper poor, Greg. We lived in a 3-bedroom row home.
Oh,
So we were a little bit. We were on the high end. You were down the lower end. You know what I mean? But Greg, a lot of people out there have these dreams about what they want to become when they grow up. When they're young kids and all that stuff. You happen to, in my estimation, land one of the greatest jobs in the world. You became an FBI agent. What was that? What was that journey like?
well, I was, how should I put this?
After you get out of prison, you mean?
Almost. But when you live in a neighborhood like we lived in with row homes, how should I put it? At the time, when I was growing up, there were a lot of gangs. All these gangs were starting to develop. And we never really had a gang. All the guys I hung around with were all the guys who were athletes. We played basketball, we played stickball. If you don't know what stickball is, it's a broomstick handle and a little pimple ball. We played that. We played sports all the time.
Greg, you must have played wireball.
Wireball. Yep, all that stuff.
King. It had some other names, but yeah, that's what you do in a row home area.
Yeah, and it was a neighborhood where you would always hang out along the main drag, which was a street called Long Lane. And um, when the Vietnam War was going on at that time, and a lot of the guys in the neighborhood who were getting drafted would go and fight the war in Vietnam and then come home and hang out on the lane. Like everybody hung out at a certain spot. We hung out in front of a steakhouse called DNC Steakhouse, and the short term for it was the Greeks, Danny and Kathy, who were Greek and ran the steak shop, and were very good to us. But about 5 stores down the street was a pool hall, and all these guys that were coming back from Vietnam were addicts. They were all shooting heroin. I saw 2 guys die in the pool room just from an overdose. It kind of really affected me. So I always stayed away from drugs. Always, always, always stayed away from drugs. My guys, the guys I hung around with, none of us did drugs. We all stayed away from drugs. So we really didn't have those issues in our background. And then I went to, Catholic high school. Augustinians taught us. Graduated from Catholic grade school where the nuns taught us. I went to my first year in college was at a school called Textile, Philadelphia Textile. And I went to play baseball. And I roomed with a guy who was from Cardinal O'Hara, who was the rival high school to us, but he was the starting center on the basketball team. And I wasn't. We had the same exact classes. We did the same amount of work. He got all B's. I got 2 D's, 2 F's, and a C. So they asked me to seek my education elsewhere. And I decided at that point to just try to go to, I went to St. Joe's, took 2 classes. I got 1 class transferred over from Textile to St. Joe's. And at the time, I had gone out a couple times with a girl whose dad was an FBI agent. And her brother had just started working for the FBI in Philadelphia as a clerk. And I talked to her dad. His name was Joe Verica, and he was a really nice, good guy. And he talked to me a little bit about the FBI and said, why don't you, we have openings. It was right after the media burglary, so they were really kind of beefing up the FBI. And he said, why don't you apply?
We discussed that. That was the night of the Frazier Ali fight, 1971. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yep. March 8th.
Yeah.
And in any event, I thought, well, I applied. And I thought, in a million years, I'm not going to get this. And then it became kind of a bet with my friends who all said, in a million years, you're not going to get into the FBI. Well, I did. And I started working in the support area at the FBI. I was a support clerk. Worked there 5 years. Took the agent's test and passed, and then went down to Quantico. From Quantico, I went to New York. I was in New York 9 years, and then I got transferred back to Philadelphia.
Before you go there, when we go back, let's take a step back. Do you remember the break-in in the media at the FBI office, which is eventually where you and I both wound up?
Right.
But it was in Newtown Square.
Right.
Tell our audience a little bit about that, Greg.
Well, I mean, I wasn't working there then. I started working June of 71, and media was in March of 71. So when I first came to the FBI office in Philadelphia, all hell was breaking loose because they had taken a lot of FBI files. There were all kinds of agents devoted to investigating who had perpetrated that burglary. I remember it was codenamed Medburg, media burglary. The FBI has all those acronyms for cases. And a large portion of the office was dedicated to try and find out who did that. And, I just first started working there, and I'm thinking to myself, what's going on here? It was like just sheer, how should I put it? It was pedal to the metal there every day. Not necessarily for us, but for the agents. But that's, and then eventually they I think they did solve it, but they were all acquitted in court.
Did you hear how they broke into it though? What
Yeah,
was their, yeah? Well, how'd that go down?
they were on the office was right across from the courthouse in Media, and there was a door from the hallway that was kind of like an access door where employees went in and out, and the lock was broken. So what they would do is the agents would push a cabinet in front of the door so it wouldn't open, and all they did was push the door and knock the cabinet over to get in.
Wow.
None of us were in the bureau at this time, but I did some reading about it, and you got to give the people credit. They picked, and for the people who are listening and watching, the first Muhammad Ali Joe Frazier fight was probably the biggest sporting event in the 20th century. Would you guys agree at that time?
Yeah.
It's before the Super Bowl really kicked in. That wasn't that big of a deal yet. And everyone was talking about this fight. Two undefeated heavyweight boxers. So the team, these were basically the radical leftists. They wanted to get information out of the FBI of Vietnam War stuff, whatever. And they chose purposely that night because they knew the entire world, well, at least the entire U.S. Would be focused on, pay-per-view at movie theaters, or even, or I think you could listen. They didn't even do it round by round. You had to listen after the round on the radio, and you catch what's happening. So the bottom line is, it was a very sophisticated. In some ways, it wasn't sophisticated. You're right, Greg. They just pushed in a door. Again, I know J. Edgar Hoover, from what I read, was very, very upset when this happened, and a number of agents were, if they weren't fired, they were sent to where they used to go, Butte, Montana, back in those days.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the radicals finally came out in the last year or so. I think the 50th anniversary, well past the statute of limitations. They said, "Yeah, we did it. We're the ones that did it, and here's how we did it." So anyway, interesting time, Greg, for you to start in the FBI just a few months after that.
It was funny because the agents knew who did it, just couldn't prove it.
Sure.
And they ended up, the people who did Media did a draft center over in Camden. And the agents recruited a member of that group who had a part in that over there. And he was cooperating. They ended up arresting everybody as they were getting ready to, enter into the draft board. And the cooperator, I can't remember his name. He was kind of like a construction guy, just a regular guy. His child ended up dying between the arrest and the trial. And he had some type of thought in his head that this must be some type of retribution from God or something because he did this. And he reneged, which ended up in in an acquittal for those folks.
So, Greg, real quick, you when you joined the bureau as a clerk in June of '71, did you have your college degree yet, or were you going at night then?
I was going at night. I worked during the day and took 6 courses a semester, and got out in '75. Graduated in '75.
And again, for the younger folks, you actually had to show up and sit in classrooms, maybe drive an hour to get back and forth to a campus, and there was no online stuff. So you're working at least 40 hours a week, and trying to drive, quickly to these campuses at night. So you did it the hard way, no doubt about that.
It was, and you have to remember the last class ended at 10:40, so I would get home well after 11 o'clock, and then have to get up the next morning at 6:30 to catch the train to get into the office.
Yeah.
Old school.
Oh yeah.
Old school. They're real old school. The hard way. There's nothing easy about the way Greg did it. Greg, you wind up in New York. All right. I mean, everybody says there's the FBI and then there's the New York FBI. It's just a whole different animal.
Oh yeah.
What kind of cases were you working up in New York?
When I was 23 when I went to New York. The earliest you can become an agent is 23.
Wow.
But I went to New York at 23, and I was assigned to work organized crime on the Genovese crime family. And I had a great New York supervisor, Sean Hilly, great big redheaded Irish guy who really was a good supervisor. And I remember they would send us out. Pardon me?
No, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. You'd be doing cases, and they would say, go out and interview, this person, this person, this person. And in order to try to make cases against the organized crime figures, you would start with gambling because it was the easiest violation to prove, and loan sharking. And you would go and you'd interview these little old ladies who were, making bets, placing bets, trying to get information from them. And they would tap me on the head and say, "What? You go back to the office, little fella. You go back, I wasn't making much of an impact."
Here's some cannoli for you.
What's that?
Here's some cannoli for you.
Exactly.
Greg, did you ever have the opportunity to meet Joe Pistone? And what was the circumstances around when you met Joe?
Joe, I didn't even know who Joe.
Tell the story.
Well, Joe Pistone was probably one of the best kept secrets in the FBI office. They would send agents out that hadn't really been known to the organized crime figures to give them money. And, I thought he was an informant, to be honest with you. And Joe would argue with you and say, you tell Leo, you tell this guy, and I knew they were like the supervisors in the SAC. And I'm thinking, who's this guy telling us what we should do? And I never knew until I got to Philadelphia when it all came out.
Donnie Brasco.
Yeah.
And the real Donnie Brasco worked in Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's true. We did have an agent named Donnie Brasco.
It was Joe's nephew.
Exactly. He was Joe's nephew.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's why Joe took the name.
Right.
Donnie was a little kid at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody, little commercial here. Go back to season 2. We did a great interview. I think that was season 2, Ray, with Joe Pistone. So check that interview out. 2 episodes, I think. It went long. Anyway, Greg, back to you.
There's a guy who had a lot of that took a lot of guts.
Greg, you had a chance to work the IRA at one time, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And the IRA is the Irish Republican Army.
Correct.
You had a couple good stories about working them, and it was once something about explosives or weapons or something. You were involved in something.
Mm-hmm.
I remember you telling me this story, and I thought it was a great story about this. What happened with that? You were with John Winslow.
You mean when we were making the buy?
When you were making a buy and you were working undercover, where you had the Irish brogue, and you were
right.
You guys were, yeah.
It's funny you even bring that up today. My supervisor at that time was a fellow by the name of Lou Stevens.
Yeah.
His daughter called me today and told me he died Saturday. He was just a phenomenal supervisor, just a great, backed his guys 100%, wonderful guy. Just to backtrack a little bit, when I was going to retire from the FBI and start this private investigation company, I went to Lou. He spent the entire day with me, showing me how his record system worked. And basically what he did is he stole the same system from the FBI and implemented it into his business. And that's exactly the same way I do it today. It worked in the FBI on tracking, and we're doing that today. But anyhow, getting back to your question, about that. We had worked a number of IRA cases, which cost me not years, but months of silence from my mother, who refused to talk to me because I was working for the Protestants rather than the Catholics. And it was difficult in an Irish Catholic family, when you had to do those cases. They kind of had a romanticism to them, the IRA guys, that you kind of almost kind of liked. You know what I mean? They were good, not good. I don't want to say good people, but they were likable people. They weren't like mass murderers or anything like that, but they felt they had a cause, and they were, doing their thing. We arrested a lot of them, and I never held a grudge against any of them. And honestly, none of them ever held a grudge against us. It was business. They were doing their thing, we were doing our thing. But we managed to get close to some, I don't want to say close, but the IRA people in Dublin knew who we were, and we knew who they were. Well, we got a call from an IRA higher up, called the American, I guess it was the consulate to the UN or embassy or something like that. And they were concerned because they had been contacted by a fella from Canada, who wanted to sell the IRA plutonium. And they didn't want to get involved in anything like that. So they were willing to set this guy up for us. So the IRA and us, we were actually working for the same, for the same goal. We set it up. We had a hello phone. If you guys remember what the hello phones were, we didn't have cell phones. Yep. A hello phone was a dedicated line that really was listed to no one. And we ended up working out communications with this fella whose name was Jerry Grabina. He was from Montreal, Ray. Maybe he's home by now. But he agreed to meet us, and he set up a series of, you talk about the comedy in a case. This one was funny. But he said, I'll meet you at Stark's Steakhouse in Midtown Manhattan. And he said, he goes, what are you going to be wearing? I said, I'm going to be wearing a green. And I had a brogue, and Winslow, also John Winslow, my partner, had a brogue, a great big red beard, long red hair. He was doing two cases. He was working undercover on the docks, buying guns. And he was working the IRA.
Cold Red fans, Fitz here. Are you interested in a career in criminal justice? You've heard me talk about numerous cases I've worked over the years involving the scientific analysis of language known as forensic linguistics. Well, Pennsylvania Western University now has a fully accredited MA program, which I actually co-developed, where I teach forensic linguistics along with various other excellent professors too. This is the only forensic linguistic graduate program in the world which is both online and asynchronous. That means the courses are 100% on your schedule. We have professor video recordings, academic readings, and real-life case exercises posted weekly, and you can access any time to review and then complete the week's assignment. If you're interested in learning how written and spoken language can help solve crimes and get a master's degree at the same time, check out the Pennsylvania Western University's Forensic Linguistics program at www.pennwest.edu/justice.
We're very generous with your time here. Ray, do you want to, any last comments or questions?
I do have a comment. It doesn't pertain to you, Greg, but just so you know, I was in Florida about a week and a half ago, and I think you and I spoke when I was getting in the airport, Greg. And I found out that, Jim, you and I have followers down in Florida. I'm out at a bar, and there's a couple young ladies that, came to me, happened to be friends of my daughter's, and their names are Kelly, Jen, Jamie, and Aya. And they all said that they follow us and they love the show. And I told them I'd give them a shout out. So, ladies, thanks for listening.
Keep listening,
Greg,
ladies.
Thank you. Greg,
Subscribe.
Thank you for being here tonight with us.
But we're going to come back, so tune into the next one. And in the meantime, check out our coldredpodcast.com or our social media sites. Subscribe if you don't mind. And we're going to see you next time and finish up. So thanks, everyone, for listening. Ray, thank you. And see you both very shortly in the next episode.